Welcome to Faith in Practice, presented by Higher Powered Sports, PT, the podcast where faith meets everyday life and vocational calling. Each episode, your host, Kurt Kessler, and his guest will explore how to live out your faith in your work, relationships, and daily challenges. Let's grow together and discover how to live out your faith with passion and purpose. Let's get started.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Faith in Practice. Today is a special one for me. I'm joined by one of my closest friends, Andrew Eyster. Andrew is an inpatient physical therapist. My perspective, we grew up 20 minutes from each other, but we didn't know each other until we went to PT school. He is 2 years younger than me, and he acts like he's 10 years younger than me. I'm not that old. But we became very close friends in PT school. Our families are now close, and I'm super thankful for Andrew in my life, and he has a really awesome story to tell here to glorify God. So the reason I wanted him on today is to talk about him and his wife, their persistence in faith, trusting God's plan, and being rewarded for their faithfulness. So Andrew, welcome on today.
Great. Thanks for having me. I've been an avid listener, so I feel honored to also be on the show as well.
Yeah. Well, listen, if ratings tank after this, I'll know why.
I'm out. Yeah, I'm out. It's me. It's completely me.
All right. So why don't you just start by giving the listener a little bit of background on how you came to your current beliefs and how that was shaped and grown throughout your experiences?
Yeah, so born and raised in the church. I grew up with a grandfather who was a pastor who had been at a church in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, where my mom and my dad met. And then I grew up in that same church. Came to know the Lord, put my faith in Christ at a very young age, and then grew in my faith year after year in going to youth group, being involved in my church. I would play the piano at church. I would be a part of missions trips, and just felt like being involved in God's body was such an important part of my life. And then even at home, my mom and dad were a beautiful example of a godly marriage, of putting God first in the home. Theology were even talks around the Thanksgiving table, like with my grandfather. So like my brother ended up going to seminary and becoming a pastor, and then now is a missionary at college campuses. So like just the priority of faith and God in my life has been there for a long time. After high school, I attended Messiah College for undergraduate studies as well, where I really feel like my faith took off. I was part of the baseball team there, and being surrounded by other godly men was not something I had on a sports team as I went to public school. So being involved in Bible studies with peers, and not just youth group, but it's different, I think, when you're on a sports team. There's a certain camaraderie that you have, that iron sharpening iron type of feeling that is different than I think being at youth group. So I think when I joined this team and was a part of this, we did mission trips together as a team. We did community outreaches as a team. And that group of men has shaped my faith journey so much, being in college, part of that team. After college, my wife and I got married, and we now attend a church here in Harrisburg called Life Center, which has also just been a really blessing in kind of what we're here to talk about tonight. That church has really just been a cornerstone for our faith as well as our families. Alyssa, my wife, grew up in this, pretty much the same town as me, went to the same high school, different churches, but her family has been rooted in their belief in Christ, and that's kind of what brought us together. And we have still growing, but we're loving the Lord together now as a couple, and it's just been a real blessing.
Before we get to our main topic today,
sure.
The story you told about the baseball team and how that shaped your faith, that's really cool. And I talked about something fairly similar in my episode with Jocelyn. The first time I really felt that community of believers around me was during our PT class, our PT school. And it was something that was so special to me because the idea of iron sharpening iron really holds true in that situation. Like just the group of us that we had there, holding each other accountable for things, all striving towards the same goal. I will probably never have it to that extent or in that same way again. And so that time when I met you and the rest of the class, like that was a real special time for me.
Yeah.
So the reason I brought you on here today is to tell our listeners the story of just your how you got your family started here, because it was a situation that I feel several people or a group of people can definitely relate to. And I think it's important for them to hear how you overcame that and kind of what the end result was. So tell us a little bit about the story of how you started your family here.
Yeah, so I'll start big and kind of and go in and then come back to the big picture. But we welcomed Everett John Eyster into our family in November of 2024 on November 17th. So he is almost 6 months old. He's sleeping right now. Hopefully
That's a
that
good
lasts
thing.
for a lot. Yeah,
That's a good
hopefully that
thing.
lasts for a lot longer than hopefully the end of this video. But him coming into our life has been such a blessing. We didn't know it was going to be as big of a blessing as what it was. We also didn't know how hard it was going to be for him to arrive. I'm going to try to make it through this whole story without crying. But if I do, just you can relate, as you know, I know you shared a story about you saturating tissues, I think a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
So that may happen tonight as well. But first and foremost, God has been so good. To him the glory for just all the blessings that we have, including Everett. But Alyssa and I, as we were ending the end of PT school together, she was a rock for me during PT school. She worked 2 jobs so that I could be in full-time school. She's a teacher and then she coached soccer, and she was amazing doing that for us. And PT school is nearing its end, and we're like, man, like we would like to start a family. I think we're like ready for it financially. We want to be parents. I had pretty well thought that I had a job lined up even before I interviewed. The hospital I was part of was giving me feedback that, there's a job here if and when you decide to apply. So I didn't have too much worry in that, and we were decided like let's start trying. So this was February of 2022. We graduated in May, so it's like 3 months before the end of PT school, and we had decided as a couple she's gonna step aside from using birth control, and we're gonna try for a family. And initially, we were obviously excited, and we were also a bit nervous, but we didn't realize that like how hard disappointment felt. We tried for 6 months without like a schedule or anything, or out tracking anything physiologically. We tried for another 6 months with starting to at least track her cycles and really give it like a try where we're really focusing on capturing that time of the month where we can conceive. So March 2023 rolls around. We had tried for a year of and no results. So we're obviously already disappointed. We're already maybe a bit frustrated. So we had kind of reached out to, I don't necessarily say reached out, but like we had somehow got a clinic name that we could go to for some more help. And that clinic was a UPMC clinic in Camp Hill called Divine Mercy. We really felt like it was the Lord leading us to that clinic. It's the only clinic in the area that I know of that's a OBGYN clinic, as well as a fertility clinic that does not prescribe birth control. They're a faith-based clinic, and they also do not refer for IVF or IUI right away. Like that's kind of like their last ditch effort. They abide by infertility is a symptom of a true cause of something else. And if you are having infertility issues, there's something else going on. You're not just naturally infertile. So we start with our initial evaluation. They start talking to us about just what we've been doing. They immediately start asking Alyssa, can we start taking blood work? Can we start doing hormone panels? We just want to see like what's going on. Are you creating an egg? Are you ovulating? Of course, I was tested, and my levels and things were tested as well. So over the course of that next 6 months, so from about March to September 2023, Alyssa had probably visited that office 20 times, or an office 20 times. Like that office, or going to get blood work, or like going to a lab. Like she had just had so many appointments. She was getting her blood taken every week or every other week, I think, for the whole 6 months. And for a girl who absolutely hates needles, that was like the worst part. I literally was like, outside of the emotional disappointment and like roller coaster that this was, like getting stuck with a needle all the time was like the bane of her existence. She was getting just all the tests. So the hardest part about all of that was everything was coming back fine. You're normal. I think she was told she had a little bit of low progesterone. She had some low levels here or there, but nothing like, she wasn't scraping the bottom of the charts or the levels. It was simply just everything's normal. Everything's coming back fine. You are ovulating. Your levels are a little off. We can supplement those, but for the most part, everything's fine. Meanwhile, we're trying for these 6 months as well, to no avail. The next step after all those things is they basically say everything's normal. So we're concerned that endometriosis might be going on. And you've heard the term, we've heard the term, but we weren't sure exactly what it was. So we had to obviously do some research. We had a lot of questions. And they basically said it's somewhere between cancer and an autoimmune disease. It has properties of both of those things. It spreads like cancer, not as fast, but it spreads throughout the body. And we're not really sure what causes it, kind of like an autoimmune disease. So, that's the first time we really had thought about that being an issue. And then we said, all right, well, great. Like, how do we know we have it? Or how do we know that's something that we're combating? And they said, well, the only way to truly identify it and diagnose that is through surgery. So then we're like, oh man, shoot, like, is this an easy surgery? Is this like, invasive, or is it minimally invasive? And they said, it's pretty minimally invasive. It's laparoscopic, but we have to go in and see kind of what's going on. So that October, we were scheduled for a surgery. And meanwhile, the doctor that we saw is kind of like eats, sleeps, and breathes endo. And her waiting list of getting a surgery for her is so long. And we got put on this list sometime that summer, and then we had to wait till October to kind of get the surgery scheduled. It was tough to wait that long for sure. So October 23, they go in. Their plan is to explore. If they find it and it's treatable, we'll get rid of it. The technology they use is called NAPRO technology. It's robot assisted. They basically burn off any endo that they find, and then they take everything back out, and it's supposed to be gone. And of course, they're going to check other things too while they're in there, tubes, things like that, to make sure everything's good. They go in there, and it's supposed to take, a couple hours, but within an hour, I get a text. I'm in the waiting room. It says, we're closing up and we're done. It was very quick. And I always almost felt like I remember thinking this, either there's nothing there or there's a lot there. And I remember sitting in that waiting room thinking, God, please let there be nothing there. But then I also remember praying, like, but give us an answer. Like, we still want an answer, but I don't want there to be anything there. I felt so like torn. Like I almost was like pleading with God, but just like also not like, I don't want an answer. I don't want there anything to be there, but let's figure out what this is. And I just felt so back and forth. The doctor calls me in and she says, unfortunately, there is a lot of endometriosis in there. So endometriosis is the lining of the uterus growing outside of the uterus, and it was growing on her bladder, her intestines. It had crawled up all the way to her diaphragm and ribcage, actually, which is, for you anatomy people, it's pretty far north. Pretty far from your uterus, last time I checked. So it had, honestly, it grew further than we had wanted. And the doctor basically said, I cleaned up a few things at the bottom with her fallopian tubes, but I was not prepared to tackle that much of it today. So we're going to have to do it at a later date. And I'm in tears. Alyssa's, still coming out of anesthesia. So I have to tell her basically like, hey, they found a lot, but we couldn't do anything today. So we're then told like, you just have to wait for us to get you back in. And we had no idea when that was going to be. They said it could be another 4 months. It could be February. It could be by the time we're ready to come back on. So Alyssa's healing up. She took about 10 days off work, something like that. And meanwhile, we're just praying. We're obviously not trying because she just had surgery. So like, we're just waiting on the Lord and waiting to just hear back from the surgeon's office. I think it's the week before Thanksgiving. So it's only like about a month later. We get a call that says, hey, Dr. Whitaker had an opening and she immediately thought of you guys and thought you guys might want to get another surgery scheduled sooner than later. Alyssa, I don't even think texted me to consult me. She just immediately took it, if I remember correctly. It was like basically like, hey, they have an opening. I'm taking it. I'm saying yes. I think I said yes. And we just felt like that was such an answer to prayer. For Dr. Whitaker to think of us specifically, for there to be such a quick turnaround was so good. The day before Thanksgiving of 2023, which is a significant date. Listeners, remember that date because it's pretty significant. The day before Thanksgiving, 2023, Alyssa has surgery, 6 hours to remove stage 4 endometriosis, meaning it's grown all over the place. Um, and it was gone. So then my question to Dr. Whitaker was, what can we expect from this? What is the probability that we conceive after a surgery like this? And we were told it's about 60% chance, which is not that far away from 50-50, if you ask me. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, if she told me like, oh, it's a 50% chance, that feels really uneasy. Anything lower than 50, you're like, oh man. So 60% felt very low to me, and I was very discouraged, and I think Alyssa was too. But she took 3 weeks to recover. She felt like her insides were just raw. She felt pretty sore for a while, but it was gone. We did ask the doctor, will it come back? Like, will this hinder conception? And she said, once it's gone, it should be gone and not really come back for a very long time. So we were allowed to start trying then after Alyssa felt better. She was feeling miserable for a while, and we were just scared, very scared to just start this process over again. But in March of 2024, and I'll even say this, like in February of 2024, we had a service at our church that we felt was very important. It was like a first fruits church. Bring your first fruits to God. Bring your requests to God for this coming year. Like, this is the beginning of the year. I think it was January, February, maybe. And we felt called to just like present this request to God with in faith, stepping into an extra tithe and offering of just trusting in the Lord for this. And 6 weeks later, March of 2024, we had a 6-week positive pregnancy test for the first time ever. Man, we were so happy. But I was in a bit of true disbelief. I was like, those things don't work, right? Or I was like, take another one. Like we just had so many negatives that I was like, this is a false positive. I still just, I was like the doubting Thomas, I guess. I was like, this can't be real. I was like, this is not real. So we waited a little bit, and I said, let's take another one. And then that one was positive too. And we were just overjoyed. And so we went into our appointments, and to kind of close the loop here, we went in, we had all the testing, there's a baby, there's the ultrasound, and we were given a due date of the day before Thanksgiving, 2024. It had God's timing written all over it. And I know we're going to talk about that more. That was a long-winded timeline. It felt like a long time for those 2 years, but he arrived November 17th, 2024. Which was not the day before Thanksgiving. He came a little early, which we're also grateful for. But yeah.
So, gosh, I have goosebumps right now, and it's because from afar, Carly and I were kind of supporting you through prayer and thought. And so, for anybody listening, the reason why this is a big deal, and like we all have challenges, we all have struggles, we all have mountains to climb. But the reason why this is significant is because if you are lucky enough to know Andrew and Alyssa, there's no one better suited to be parents than these two. And to see both in my friendship with Andrew and our family's friendship with them, to see two people who are just meant to be parents. They have so much to give. They have so much to share. They will love their child unlike anybody else. And to see them deprived of that for the longest time and not have answers and have no other choice but to rely on their faith, that's the story that I want people to know here. And it was difficult for us because we're helpless in the situation, just as you were. But we didn't have the day-to-day emotions because it wasn't our situation. We finished PT school together in May of 2022. Our first child was born in March of 2022. And I remember shortly before then, you said you started trying around that time. I remember those conversations towards the end of PT school. And, you just assume when you start that it's just going to happen. And so I cannot relate. I can only relate like 1%. Like when we started trying for our first, like it didn't happen for us the first month. And I felt that disappointment. Like I felt inadequate. I felt like, I must have done something wrong. And then like
Yeah.
month 2, it happened. And so to go through all of that magnified by not having answers, I can't imagine what that felt like. What were some of the challenges that you guys had together? What were some of the thoughts you were having? Did you have any realizations along the way? Tell me a little bit about what your day to day was like, or how that looked in your relationship throughout that time.
Yeah, it was a lot of highs and lows. I mean, each month you try, you think this is the month. This is it. Let's go. Like, this is it. We're having a baby. And then nothing. She gets her monthly cycle, and we realize this isn't the month. And to realize that also, I learned a lot about reproduction, female body, how this all works. To realize that there's like a 40 to 72 hour window for you to capture. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's larger, depending on the woman. But like you have like 2 to 3 days to capture in a month. Stand that over a year, you have like 24 days to capture this. So we always felt maybe a bit rushed, maybe a bit. It felt, scheduled at times. It felt like this has to be it. Like we're gonna do it. We have to capture the moment, and then the moment when you know, be a negative feeling. So it was a very highs and lows. The emotional roller coaster of it was very hard to handle. We felt a little bit of like inadequacy, I think is a good word for it too. How you kind of describe that. What's wrong with us? Like we just want this so bad. We want to be parents. We want to be parents now. I think we felt a little like impatient at times. I was talking to Alyssa about this recently, and I don't think in any way we felt angry, but disappointment for sure. We felt frustrated for sure. We felt, yeah, a lot of those smaller emotions, but I don't think we ever felt angry at God or angry at each other or angry at the doctors. I think anger was something we did not experience, which was good. I think we were able to put it into perspective. I think Alyssa took it harder than I did. Um, Knowing that she was going through all those hormone testing and getting her blood taken all the time, she certainly got more annoyed that I didn't have to get my blood taken all the time and things, which was hard. But yeah, we felt so many different emotions. And I think something that we prided ourselves on, or not prided ourselves on, but we were vulnerable enough to keep everyone updated on this, family and friends, because we wanted the prayer. Um, we could not have done it without our support systems. Our parents were so supportive. Our siblings and extended families were so supportive. Our friends were amazing. We were involved in a Bible study. And I mean, every week we were just praying for this and seeking out prayer for us. I mean, at the end of every week, we would just have this prayer session where we felt just so supported in prayer through our small group as well. So all those emotions, even though they were highs and lows and we felt all of them, we also felt all of the good emotions and supported through the process as well.
What were your own prayers like? What were you praying for? What did you see happening through your prayer?
Yeah, our prayers I think, were pretty, pretty straightforward. I mean, we would spend time before bed and things when we were in prayer. Simply, I would say for first and foremost, we were just asking for a baby. We would just say, God, we just want you to open up Alyssa's womb. We pray for a baby. We pray for conception. We didn't know, maybe during all this time what was going on, but we prayed for healing. We prayed for direction. Um, yeah, man, it was it was hard to know exactly what to pray for. They always say don't pray for patience, the God will give you time to be patient. So whether or not that's theologically accurate is maybe a different podcast, but Yeah, man, we just prayed for simply just healing and for conception, and we just don't really know even what else how else to word it. Uh, we prayed for God's will to be done. We don't always know what that is, and that was, um, I think we prayed for things more specifically, like God, give us a baby, give us a healthy baby, give us a positive pregnancy test, because that's what we wanted. I think it was so much harder to say, God, let your will be done, because sometimes that's not what you want. So those words were hard to pray for. Those were the
Yeah.
hard things to say.
So my next question is, what if the answer was no? Did you prepare yourself for that possible reality?
I don't know how often we thought about it because it was hard to think about. It was really hard to think about. I know there was times that we would both look at each other, and I mean, there was a time I looked at Alyssa and said, I don't want to adopt. Like that's where my mind was. I remember saying that, just thinking like, I don't want to adopt a baby, and nothing against that at all, right? Like if you know if you're someone who's going through adoption or is adopted or was adopted, I mean that it's such a special. My best friend, he has his sister does adoption, and I know them, and I know the little boy really well, or not really well, but well enough. And man, what a beautiful thing that is to do, to adopt somebody. But I just felt like I don't want to do that. Right? I want a baby. I want to be a dad to my own family, my own son. And I remember having that conversation and just thinking like, but maybe that is where God wants us to do, is to be parents or be foster parents to something else. So my mind for sure went there at times, and it was hard to think about, and it was not easy to come to that conclusion or to think that that's what God's plan was for us. And I know that there are times where God does not answer the prayer that you wanted in the manner at which you wanted it.
I would just want to sprinkle on a little bit more context around adoption because with what you said, those have been conversations in our house too. And especially before we had children of our own, I had a hard time with the concept as well. And to think of it this way, especially as believers, like we all have different callings, we all have different skill sets, we all have different purposes. And there are some people or some families that are really strongly called to adopt. And it
Mhm.
is, like you said, it's so special and it's so
It is.
necessary to
Yeah.
give those children an opportunity for a loving home.
And it's
But it's,
something in the Bible that God even calls us to, right? I mean, he says take care of
yeah,
the widows and orphans. So it's something as Christians that you almost feel like you almost should be called to, whether you are or not.
right. And that's a good point because there are so many times where like I felt selfish or I felt, like I wasn't open minded enough or my heart wasn't open enough. But I just, to this point, I haven't had that strong of a pull towards that, at least not the way that Carly has. But I mean, there's a family in Mannheim here who I think they have adopted like 8 or 9 children or something like that. And like, that's something so special. But there is also something to be said about wanting, I mean, the love that we have for our wives and just wanting to see offspring produced in our likeness is something that's kind of fun and special in its own right. So
Yeah.
just wanted to take a minute and talk through that. But yeah, it was just I always thought that too. I was like, no matter what you guys do, you're gonna be great parents. You're gonna be honoring the call for whatever that call was. But like we knew how bad you guys wanted that experience for yourselves, and so it's just wonderful that you ended up having that prayer answered.
Yeah.
Was there at any other point in your life, are you able to draw any kind of parallels to either the emotions that you felt or the challenge that this presented? Have you had any other friends that experienced the same thing? Like, is there anything that you can think back on that maybe God was preparing you for the type of endurance that you would need during this season?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with this. Say one thing that we've learned, and the one thing that we constantly tell people now through this experience is it is not our timing and not our timeline. It is God's. And God's timing is perfect, and it's not what we want, but it will be on God's timeline, and He has it all planned out, and it is, it is for a purpose. There's lots of verses and stuff that I think came to mind during this process, but all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. And we didn't know what the good would look like at first, but it all worked together, and in God's timing was just so good. And outside of the baby coming, in the meantime, we started trying before necessarily I had the job, even though I kind of lined it up, but I was able to get my full-time job. In January of 2023, we purchased our first home, and we were renting in some very dingy places that we maybe wouldn't have wanted to bring a baby to. We purchased our first home then in January 23, and then a year later brought a baby home. So like we look back and think like, man, it's so amazing that it happened in that order. Like, what were we thinking trying in February 22? We didn't want to bring a baby into that dingy apartment we were renting, right? We didn't want to like shake the dice and roll the dice if I was going to have a job or not. And I just think that like I look back and I think all those things were put into place and happened before we had Everett and before we conceived Everett. So I think that's what we've learned through this, and we've been telling people that in other ways. We have people close to us that are changing jobs, and we just say like, listen, we know you maybe want to get out of this scenario and go to a different scenario, but like just lean on the Lord, and His timing will be perfect. I changed locations of my job recently. I'm still in the same hospital system, but I actually work at a satellite campus now. That might be news to you, but newsflash, I work at a different hospital now.
We'll talk about it after the show.
Yeah. But in all purposes to relate it to this is like, I volunteered to work at this new hospital, but I was in full preparation of going back to the original hospital after I was done just getting it off the ground. But I show up at this new hospital. I love the staff. I love the medical team, and I'm staying. And just like that, after working at a different hospital for 8.5 years, I just decided I'm going to stay at this new place, which is 8 minutes down the road and is 8 minutes from Everett's daycare. And I just feel like, again, it might have been just God's timing, and that hospital didn't even open until about a month ago. And I've just seen the timeline is not what Andrew and Alyssa want ever. It's just got God's handiwork written all over it. And we've seen that in our finances. We've seen that in relationships with our families. We've seen healing and restoration in relationships there. So I think that can relate to a lot of different worlds, your job, your relationship with your spouse. If you're waiting on breakthrough, if you're waiting on restoration, waiting on the Lord and waiting for His timing is so worth it. Is so worth it. It's so hard in the moment. It's so difficult, and it can be almost, I hate to use the word frustrating because I don't feel like frustration is something we should have towards God, but waiting is hard, but it's so worth it and just so worth the blessing in the end.
I think I'm going to change the name of this podcast from Faith and Practice to God's Timeline.
Yeah, go for it, man. It's so good. Yeah.
So anybody who has listened to any of these shows, I talked about so often the time where I was praying and waiting for the answer and ultimately got the response to start my own business. But even going back to the 4 years I spent getting no's applying to PT school, again, it was because Messiah didn't even have a program yet, and that was the place for me. In those 4 years, like I was working full-time as an athletic trainer. Carly was working full-time in the hospital as a dietitian. And like we were able to save up enough money to, one, buy our first house here, and also to put a very large chunk towards PT school, which is not cheap. And I was thinking like, if I had gotten into PT school like right off the bat, our financial situation would be way different, way more challenging. Who knows like what house we would have ended up in or whatever. And it's just, and I think in some ways it's easier for us as believers to connect some of these dots and believe there's a purpose behind where, maybe someone else would say it's just coincidence or, life just happens and whatever. But if we really believe there's a plan and a purpose for our lives, and then we can look back and connect some of those dots, it just builds even more of a case of evidence in my mind that, we're all here for a reason. We're all here with a specific purpose, and
Mhm.
you know, God is good. We just don't always see it when we're
Mhm.
climbing our own mountains. Yeah, it's just great.
I'm all for the new name change.
God's timeline. All right, let's wrap this up
Receding
here with.
hairlines and God's timeline.
I know, easy now. Easy
Yeah,
now.
there we go.
Let's wrap this up. Let's bring this home with Word Up.
It's time for Word Up.
All right, for today's Word Up, I thought this story from the Bible was very applicable for this situation. So we're going to talk a little bit about God's promise to Abraham. So God made a promise to Abraham, and this was unlikely in that time because Abraham was age 86, and it seemed to imply that God would need help to fulfill his promise to Abraham of having a child. And you just don't, it just seems not feasible at age 86 to have a child. And so what happens is Abraham and Sarah, his wife, try to take things into their own hands. So Sarah suggests that Abraham use her maid Hagar to conceive a child. And so this resulted in the birth of Ishmael. And this situation only complicated life for Abraham and Sarah. This was not God's original plan. He made the promise that he would fulfill to Abraham, and Abraham and Sarah, kind of got lost in the waiting and tried to take action on their own. So what ended up happening is there became a really big conflict between Sarah and her maid Hagar from jealousy and just, the human emotions of wanting to bear her own child. And so Sarah asked Abraham to send Hagar and the baby Ishmael away. So Abraham did so because God told him that Ishmael would raise up a great nation. So then Hagar and Ishmael fled to the desert. Ishmael was promised these things because God promised Abraham that his descendants would be kings. So Ishmael ended up becoming a king because that's what God promised. But then 13 years later, not 13 days, 13 weeks, 13 months, not Andrew's 2 years. 13 years later, God delivered on that promise to Abraham, and Sarah gave birth to their child Isaac. Isaac ends up becoming the second patriarch of Israel and ended up being the grandfather of the 12 tribes of Israel. And the big thing that I want to drive home here is that God does not need our help to accomplish his purposes and to fulfill his promises. So many times we pursue what we want, and I think Andrew just said it so well. Like it's hard to say, God, your will, God, your timeline, because we want this. But when God makes promises to us, he does not need our help to accomplish them. So he tells Abraham in very definite terms, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son. And that's Genesis 17, verse 19. So can you, the listener, can you relate to a time when you felt that God made you a promise and it didn't happen on your timeline and you felt like you had to take matters into your own hands? For me, I think back to, again, the 2 times in my life, the struggle of trying to get into PT school and the conversations I had with my dad. My dad kept asking, like, what are you going to do next? This isn't working. What's the next step? What's the next plan? What's plan B? And I said, I know this is my purpose. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep pursuing it. And that's not to pat myself on the back, but that's one example of where I felt like I was connected to the greater purpose. And then again, the struggle of being stuck at my previous job, waiting for doors to open and, praying, actively praying, like, is this what I want to do or is this where you're leading me? And eventually getting that answer and pursuing that. So I just want to take a moment and kind of think about your own life and think how this applies. And just know that when God makes us a promise, he doesn't need our help because he's going to fulfill it on his own. He's going to make it happen on his timeline. And gosh darn, if I have to say it one more time, things never happen on our timeline. So,
Kurt, if I can just say, I love that you used that story because I think that's such a powerful story of God's promises. And God certainly doesn't need our help. But the one thing I feel like he does require of us is our faith, which is so hard to do. He doesn't want our help. He doesn't want our opinions, and he definitely doesn't want us meddling with his timeline. But he does call us to just be faithful and to just step out in faith and to trust his timeline, which I think is certainly what he does require of us.
yeah, for sure. For sure. Quick shout out to David Verano for bringing some perspective on that story for me. So a couple of takeaways here. Just trust God in all things. His promises go beyond conventional human logic. And even if we make mistakes along the way, Abraham and Sarah took matters in their own hand, made some mistakes. God's promises to us remain. And if we remain faithful in him, he will use it for his good. So, this was a good episode here because I feel things a little bit deeper here because of my relationship with you, but I know there are so many people out there who are either struggling with this same thing or can very easily relate to overcoming some of the things that you did. And it was just so beautiful to see your faith through the whole process and your willingness to answer the call when it was there for you. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if there's anyone dealing with infertility, know that our God is bigger than infertility, but also that our God loves you and would just do anything to have a relationship with you as well, which I think is so important. That Alyssa and I leaned on him, and I just encourage you guys to do the same. Infertility is not something we were planning to deal with. That one definitely wasn't on our timeline, but we're so grateful for his promises and his blessing in our lives.
Yeah.
And I wish I could finish this episode by like holding up my son, and just showing you his smiling face. But I haven't heard him stir in the 50 minutes that we've been doing this podcast. So
That's good.
Maybe he'll sleep tonight. Maybe tonight's the night.
Yeah, as soon as we hang up, he's just being polite right now.
Yeah, that's all it was. It's common courtesy to not interrupt somebody when they're recording a podcast.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Faith in Practice. Thank you, as always, to everyone for listening. Thank you for Andrew for coming on and showing the courage to share his struggle and his story with him and his wife. And we hope that you were able to get something out of this. Stay tuned for some upcoming episodes here. I still have a lot of good ones in the pipeline. If you're looking to connect, you can always find my information in the show notes or reach out to me on Instagram at HigherPowerSportsPT. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Faith in Practice. We hope you found inspiration and practical wisdom to help you live out your faith on and off of life's playing fields. If today's conversation resonated with you, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us continue sharing stories and insights that empower you to align your faith with your vocation. For more resources or to connect with us, visit hpsportspt.com. That's hpsportspt.com. Remember, your faith isn't just a part of your week, it's a part of your life. Let your light shine.